Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. What are the first images from the kickoff press conference for Shields versus Joanisse? What is intended to be both a heavyweight and light heavyweight title fight, as there is both a heavyweight title and light heavyweight titles on the line.
Looking at them face to face, both 29 years old.
There seems to be a noticeable discrepancy in size. That on paper, Claressa Shields is supposed to be the fighter that's moving up in weight, but standing in front of Vanessa Joanisse, she actually looks bigger. She looks the bigger of the two, not just in terms of height and length and the tail of the tape, but her physical dimensions and even her weight.
I saw the images and wondered, at what weight does Claressa Shields walk around at? 185, 190?
It's not a secret that many fighters today walk around heavier than their actual fight weight and where they campaign, but how much heavier? Claressa sports a professional record, an unblemished record of 14 wins with no losses, no draws, 2 knockouts.
She hasn't fought in a year.
She hasn't fought since the Maricela Cornejo fight in summer of last year. If you can believe that, it's already been a year's time since then, and that was the only fight that Claressa had the entirety of last year.
You know, this is why a lot of people question her claim as being the greatest woman of all time, that maybe she is a great fighter, but she's a great fighter campaigning at not so great weights.
There's no other way to put it, because the talent pool at 154, 160, 168, now 175, and heavyweight, there's just not enough to go around up there.
Not enough going on.
That dominating these divisions, these barren weight classes, would make you the greatest fighter the sport of women's boxing has ever seen.
She's fighting Vanessa Joanisse.
I don't actually mind the opponent or mind the fight. Vanessa Joanisse did manage to become the WBC heavyweight champion in her last fight earlier this year, sporting a professional record of 7 wins with 1 loss, no draws, 2 knockouts, having never been knocked out in 8 professional fights.
I've seen her and she's all right.
She's a pressure fighter, a mid-range to inside fighter. In many ways, she has to be, because she stands in at only 5'6". She has to try to get close to her opponent because she doesn't have a choice. But like I said, she does look noticeably smaller than Claressa Shields, which makes the optics for this fight that this is intended to be Claressa moving up in weight and fighting for a heavyweight title. I think the optics would be a lot more dramatic if it were, say, Danielle Perkins that Claressa's fighting, but she's fighting someone who looks noticeably smaller than she is.
So it doesn't have that David and Goliath feel. It's not really a David and Goliath situation.
And I don't mind the fight, there's nothing wrong with it, but context is key. That this is not the same as, say, Katie Taylor moving up to 140 to fight Chantel Cameron, or Amanda Serrano moving up from 126 up to 140 to fight Katie Taylor.
That those fighters who moved up in weight, in some instances several weight classes, were taking on a better caliber of fighter, a more decorated caliber of fighter, than the fighter that Claressa's about to fight.
Fighter that Claressa's about to fight, Vanessa Joanisse, she saw action 3 times last year, and she's already seen action at least once this one, where Claressa hasn't seen action since June of last year, the Maricela Cornejo fight that she won in lopsided fashion over 10 rounds.
I only hope that Vanessa Joanisse can make the fight interesting.
At least more interesting than the Maricela Cornejo fight was, or the Emma Kozin fight, the Marie-Eve Dicaire fight, because those fights were so lopsided.
There was no drama.
And for a fight being so lopsided to where Claressa Shields is basically landing at will because she's so fast, the caveat is she doesn't knock people out.
That for it being so one-sided, can it at least end in dramatic fashion? And oftentimes it doesn't.
Categorically, Vanessa Joanisse is a champion, so you can give Shields that credit that she is fighting a champion, and if she beats her, that's another world champion she will have taken on. But like I said, context is key.
This is a champion at a weight that's practically empty.
It's going down next month, late next month on the 27th, and we'll talk more about the fight as the fight date approaches. Elsewhere in the world of boxing, Jedi Goodman, who keeps up with a lot of the metrics for combat sports, not just boxing, but UFC and professional wrestling, so on and so forth, he said, "We have some television numbers, and we will have a better handle on it next week. There were reports going around of under 200,000 pay-per-view buys for Tank versus Martin. Based on what I've gotten, that's probably within the range. It was well above Double or Nothing, but could be in the range of Revolution and maybe a bit higher. I'd say 150,000 to 220,000 would be the range.
Well, this is more or less what I thought would happen, that Gervonta Davis's next set of numbers, his pay-per-view buys for the Frank Martin fight, would herald a dramatic decline.
A descent from his last set of numbers with Ryan Garcia, well over 1 million.
This didn't even do 500,000.
But why should we believe it? Why should we qualify these numbers in this ballpark figure for Gervonta Davis's last fight? And I guess it's because that's what his numbers normally look like.
That's what he normally does.
In the range of 200,000, just north or just south of 200,000 pay-per-view buys.
That's what he normally does.
Gervonta Davis by himself, of his name value alone, never actually cracked 300 or 400 or 500,000 pay-per-view buys. The only way he was able to get over the hump was with Ryan Garcia. And Ryan, as we all know, love him or hate him, he's very popular. So you see what influence he had on the fight's commercial value, where Tank by himself, historically, his numbers hover at or around 200,000 buys. So when the latest seems to indicate that that's what he did with Frank Martin, well, that makes sense.
200,000 pay-per-view buys is really not the earmark of a star.
I'd say when you're good for in excess of 300,000 to 400,000 pay-per-view buys all on your own, without a high-profile dance partner, now you're a star, and now you're really cooking with rice.
But doesn't that then mean that the vast majority of fighters we've been seeing on these box office fights, these pay-per-views, aren't actually stars, like, say, David Benavidez?
That's exactly what that means. That if they put you out there in a box office fight, and the fight fails to bring in, I'd say, at least 300,000 buys, well, then you might as well not have done it. You might as well not have built it as a pay-per-view.
Why did they?
To try and satisfy the fighter's financial demands. The fighter hopes to make a certain amount of money from a show, and the network's not just going to throw money at them. They're not just going to give it to them, so they put them on pay-per-view, hoping that the money will come from the pay-per-view's upside.
What's the upside?
Everything that comes in after the break-even point. If you spend X amount of dollars to do a show, you hope to get X amount of dollars back, which is basically what you put in. After that,
whatever comes in after that is the pay-per-view's upside.
Once all the operational costs are covered and you get back what you put in, whatever else comes in after that is the upside of the pay-per-view.
Raw numbers.
Say you do a show and the show costed $5 million. Rough number, $5 million to put together. So you do the show, people buy it, and people show up, and then you get your $5 million back. Whatever comes in after that, that is the upside. That's what you're always hearing about. The thing is that not every pay-per-view even has an upside.
Forget about an upside. A lot of pay-per-views fail to break even.
Failing to break even means that in spite of what you put in, you didn't get all of it back, and the pay-per-view was a categorical flop.
Rough numbers.
If you put in $5 million to do the show, but you only got back $4, you lost $1 million. That's a flop.
Any situation where the pay-per-view fails to bring back what you put in is a flop, a categorical flop. The question is, was Davis versus Martin a categorical flop?
It all depends on what they spent to put it together. What did they pay Gervonta Davis? What did they pay him up front? What was the guarantee? What's the guarantee for Gervonta? What was the guarantee for Frank Martin? As well as David Benavidez, who normally headlines his own shows. What did it cost you to have him fighting on this one?
In the co-main event.
Because normally he headlined his own shows on regular Showtime. He headlined his own shows, and he started boxing on pay-per-view last year. He fought on pay-per-view 2 times. What did it cost you to have him in the co-main event?
Not just him.
Think about how many familiar faces fought on this show. A show where the best it could bring in was just a little over 200,000 buys, and that's if we round up. That's if we're generous. So you've got Gervonta Davis on the show, Frank Martin on the show, Benavidez on the show. You have unbeaten up-and-comer, or what was an unbeaten up-and-comer, in Gary Antoine Russell, Carlos Adames, WBC middleweight champion, Mark Magsayo, a former champion.
Look at all the fighters that fought on this show, the prelim card and the main card. What did all of that cost you versus what the pay-per-view brought in?
This is not a normal situation. This is not how a Gervonta Davis fight, box office fight,
is normally structured. They put a lot of familiar faces on this show to try to sell it. And in the end, all it did is what your average Gervonta Davis fight usually does. Was that enough to pay everybody? Because it's not usual. It's not normal that David Benavidez is fighting in a co-main event.
You have to wonder, what were the fighters' guarantees, each individual fighter for each individual fight? What did that cost?
Or were they working off the net?
Production. What did the production cost? Because this is a different situation than what you had going on Showtime. Showtime made a long-term commitment to the PBC, where Amazon, they didn't. This is not the same deal structure.
This looks to be just a distribution deal. They're not invested or that invested.
For Gervonta Davis's fight, to bring in just a paltry 150 or 220,000 pay-per-view buys after he did over $1 million with Ryan, well, that tells the story, doesn't it?
You ain't got it like that.
There are fight fans and content creators alike who like to run around saying that Gervonta Davis has usurped Canelo Alvarez as the face of boxing. These numbers tell a different story.
You believe him?
Of course I do. These numbers are akin to what Gervonta Davis normally does. He was on pay-per-view 5 times before he ever fought Ryan Garcia, and that's what the pay-per-views brought in.
Now without Ryan Garcia?
This is what the pay-per-view brought in. He's had 7 pay-per-view appearances, and only once did he crack $1 million buys, and that was with Ryan. The rest of the time, this is what the numbers look like.
You're not the face of boxing.
So this would put extra pressure on Gervonta to fight a more high-profile opponent in his very next fight. The name of Ryan Garcia almost immediately comes to mind, but Ryan is suspended for the next 10 months.
If Gervonta Davis is going to fight one more time before this calendar year is over, it won't be against Ryan.
Widespread rumors seem to indicate that he may go into negotiations with Vasyl Lomachenko as soon as this week, but young Shakur Stevenson's manager indicates he thinks the bigger fight is Davis versus Stevenson, not Davis versus Lomachenko. As it pertains to WBC champion Shakur Stevenson, a champion at the same weight as Gervonta, there are 3 fights that Shakur Stevenson wants, but he does not feel he is close to any of them. On the wish list of the WBC lightweight champion, a WBA champion, Gervonta Davis, WBO champion, Denis Berinchyk, and IBF champion, Vasyl Lomachenko. Gifted southpaw Stevenson, 26, meets Artem Khatunian in the last fight of his existing deal with promoter Top Rank early next month on the 7th at the Prudential Center in Newark, New Jersey. Amid speculation that Davis and Lomachenko could meet, Stevenson's co-manager, Josh Dubin, has defended Stevenson's position as a significant draw in boxing, having taken exception to a recent interview given by his promoter Bob Arum, who said Lomachenko is a more lucrative option for Davis than Stevenson, adding that Loma is the bigger fight.
If a fighter doesn't bring to the table eyeballs, people who pay to see the match, then it's really tough to make a big match for them,
Arum said. That, in my opinion, and I manage Shakur with James Prince, that is a totally nonsensical reason why they are not pushing to get Shakur this fight, said Dubin. And Lomachenko 3 fights ago couldn't fill New York's Madison Square Garden. He had to fight in a small room,
What used to be called the Hulu Theater.
where Shakur has been consistently one of the highest rated fighters on their roster any time he fights on ESPN. The only time he didn't pull one of the higher ratings is when they had him fight on a Thursday night and tried to convince us, because of the Formula One race, that was going to be the biggest event in the world. Shakur didn't even want to do it. He said they're not going to be able to fill the arena. People can draw their own conclusions. I think it's pretty obvious. In my opinion, they don't want to give him a big fight because their contract is running out, but they have the power to say to Lomachenko, look, here's this fight we're offering you. They don't do that. They could say to Tank, Davis's people, look, Shakur's a bigger fight, and he is a bigger fight in our opinion, because they're 2 undefeated guys in their prime. They're putting a 36-year-old fading Lomachenko out there against him. Shakur wants the biggest fights, and I understand they can't force people to fight him, but you give the explanation that they're trying not to negotiate a Tank Davis fight because Shakur isn't a draw. That is just nonsense.
Josh Dubin ain't telling the whole story.
The people at Top Rank can offer up Shakur Stevenson till the cows come come home till they're blue in the face, they can offer him to Gervonta as much as they like. Ultimately, Gervonta has to want the fight.
And I don't think he does.
So while Top Rank may be able to bring Gervonta Davis to the negotiation table for one of their fighters, they can't force him to fight Shakur, and they know he doesn't want him.
It's a waste of time.
Josh Dubin continued, they have the ability to help us make these fights, and they're not doing it.
I disagree.
I believe that Shakur Stevenson now finds himself in the same situation that his old buddy Terrence Crawford found himself in for years with Errol Spence Jr. Top Rank can beat the drum for that fight, but ultimately Errol had to want to fight Crawford how Gervonta would have to want to fight Shakur, and Gervonta doesn't want to fight Shakur.
Bottom line.
Josh Dubin says he thinks Top Rank can help the situation. I think it's pretty obvious why they're not. Dubin said of trying to land the Davis fight for Stevenson, what incentive is there for him to want to keep fighting for them? They're not fighting for him right now. Aram is not saying anything bad, but I'm saying it's just a lame reason, a lame excuse as to why they wouldn't pursue a Tank Davis fight. There are 3 fights that Stevenson wants: Lomachenko, Tank, and Berinchyk. Those are the fights that he wants. He's been pleading for those fights, and they could make the Berinchyk fight at the snap of a finger right now, but the specific thing I'm responding to is Aram saying that in order to make a big fight, you need someone that puts bums in the seats or eyeballs on the screen. Shakur's that guy. Just look at not only the TV ratings, but he has broken the ticket sales records for events at the United Center in Newark. He sold 10,000 seats there several times. His fight with Oscar Valdez sold around 10,000 tickets, and maybe more in Vegas. In my opinion, it's a ridiculous excuse. Dubin argues that Stevenson is a bigger draw than Lomachenko, but while Stevenson failed to dazzle against De Los Santos, Lomachenko sizzled to beat George Kambosos in Australia. Fair enough, Dubin countered. The operative part of that is against Kambosos, and that's another fight Shakur wanted, and he didn't get that.
Josh is placing too much emphasis on Top Rank's role in all of this. He really is. If what Gervonta Davis wanted was a Stevenson fight, then he'd ask for Shakur Stevenson. But he's not asking for him, is he?
Should Top Rank waste their own time making suggestions for a fight that Gervonta isn't even after? Truthfully, I don't know that he's after Vasyl Lomachenko either. The only person I've seen saying that is Bob Arum. Where's the confirmation from the Gervonta side of things?
That they're pursuing that fight.
That they're doing that fight. I would sooner expect Gervonta to fight Isaac Cruz again at 140 if he beats Rayo Valenzuela, or Rayo if he beats Isaac.
Bottom line.
Josh Dubin can say that the Stevenson fight would be bigger for Tank than the Lomachenko fight, but we don't actually know that Gervonta versus Lomachenko is going to happen. And 2,
You're trying to make this about Top Rank.
it's not about Top Rank and what Top Rank recommends. It's about what Gervonta Davis actually wants. And who says he wants to fight your fighter?
I don't think he does.
And that's what determines what happens and what doesn't.